Ever wonder what stories your heart would tell if it could sit down with a glass of lemonade and just talk hello? My dear friends, I'm Eva, 65, and full of tales, whispering to you from my front porch in Eufaula, Alabama, where the lake sparkles and the air smells of magnolias. I know you're out there, my sweet sisters, maybe rocking in your chair or sharing a laugh over tea, ready for a story that feels like home. Tonight, I'm stepping into the shoes of Ellie Harper, a woman whose journey of love and loss will tug at your heartstrings. I'll tell her story as if it's mine, straight from the soul. If it moves you, please subscribe and join our cozy circle. Drop a comment. What's a moment that shaped you? Let's share our stories, because everyone's a treasure. The fluorescent lights in the mediation office buzzed like a tired old song, casting a pale glow over the glass table in the center of the room. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of 60 years and a lifetime of love pressing down on my shoulders. Across from me was Lauren, my daughter-in-law, her blonde hair swept into perfect waves, her lips painted a sharp red that matched the fire in her eyes. She leaned forward, her designer blazer crisp, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You can't do this, Ellie," she said, her words dripping with accusation, cutting Dan out of the will. "It's cruel, it's unstable, people will see you're not in your right mind." I didn't flinch. My silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and I wore my favorite green cardigan, the one Tom used to say brought out the hazel in my eyes. I looked at Lauren, then at my son, Daniel, sitting beside her. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes red, his hands fidgeting like a boy caught in a lie. He wouldn't meet my gaze. The mediator, a woman in her 40s with a calm voice and a clipboard, glanced between us, her pen hovering over a legal pad. Outside the window, the old oak trees of Westerville, Ohio, stood tall against the October sky, their leaves a mix of gold and crimson, swaying in the breeze. They reminded me of the tree Tom planted in our backyard, the one he said would outlive us all. "Mrs. Harper," the mediator said, her tone neutral, "would you like to explain why you've chosen to amend your will?" I took a deep breath, my fingers brushing the edge of a manila folder in front of me. Inside were the documents that had changed everything: bank statements showing thousands of dollars transferred from Tom's account to Daniel's, a handwritten letter from Tom that he never sent, and, most damning of all, a USB drive with Sophie's audio diary. My 12-year-old granddaughter had done what none of us could. She'd seen the truth and recorded it. I looked straight at Lauren, her smirk faltering just for a second, and said, "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to protect Sophie. She deserves to live in a world where truth matters." Lauren's face twisted, her voice rising. You're tearing this family apart because you're grieving, you're not thinking straight. Ellie, we'll fight this. We'll show everyone you're not fit to make these decisions." The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the world holding its breath. Daniel shifted in his seat, his hands clenching, but he said nothing. I opened the folder, my hand steady despite the storm inside me, and slid it across the table to the mediator. "These are bank records," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Transfers from my husband's account to my son's. Thousands of dollars, labeled for medical expenses or rent. But they weren't for that, were they?" Lauren's eyes widened, her manicured nails digging into the table. "What are you implying?" "Those were loans Dan needed help, and Tom offered. You can't twist this into something it's not." I didn't look at her. I looked at Daniel, my only child, the boy who used to run into my arms with dandelions clutched in his chubby fists. "Daniel," I said softly, "did you tell your father you needed that money for medical bills, or was that Lauren's idea?" He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, but he didn't answer. The mediator flipped through the documents, her brow furrowing as she read the numbers. $2,000, 3 T's, $500, $12,000, labeled urgent, Lauren Medical. Then she paused at the yellow legal paper, Tom's handwriting unmistakable, the ink still bold after all these months. "This is a letter," I said, "from Tom to Daniel. He wrote it 2 weeks before he died. He never sent it, but it says everything. He knew you were lying. Daniel, he knew you were using that money for things you didn't need, and he was going to stop it." Lauren laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "A letter. That's your evidence. You're delusional. Ellie, this won't hold up in court. I didn't take my eyes off the mediator. There's more," I said, tapping the USB drive. "My granddaughter, Sophie, recorded conversations she overheard. Conversations between you, Lauren, and Daniel about how you planned to push me until I cracked. How you'd call me confused, unstable, to get control of the trust. Sophie heard it all. The room felt like it tilted. Lauren's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "She's 12, she sputtered. "She doesn't understand context. You're manipulating a child." The mediator held up a hand, her voice steady. "Mrs. Walsh, I'll need to review this evidence, but based on what I'm seeing, there's a clear pattern of deception here." She looked at me, her eyes softening. "Mrs. Harper, you've built a strong case." Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I didn't know it had gotten this bad. I'm sorry." I looked at him, my heart aching for the boy he used to be. But I didn't soften. "You didn't want to know." "Daniel," I said, "you were too busy pretending we were optional." Lauren stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You're punishing us because you're lonely, Ellie. Because you can't handle Tom being gone." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw something behind her anger, fear. Maybe, or shame, but it passed, and she stormed out, her heels clicking down the hallway like gunfire. The mediator gathered the documents, promising to follow up, and Daniel lingered for a moment, his eyes pleading, but I just shook my head, and he left. His shoulders slumped. I stayed behind, staring out the window at the oak trees, their branches swaying like they were whispering Tom's name. I'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. I wasn't always this woman, the one who could sit in a room and dismantle lies with a folder and a few words. 6 months ago, I was just Ellie Harper, a retired elementary school teacher who loved baking cookies and reading bedtime stories to my granddaughter. I lived in a red brick house in Westerville, Ohio, with a backyard full of memories and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee and cinnamon. My husband, Tom, was the heart of that house. He was a mechanic with hands rough as sandpaper and a laugh that could light up a room. Our son, Daniel, used to be part of that light, too. Back when he was a boy who'd build forts out of couch cushions and beg Tom to tell him stories about fixing cars. But somewhere along the way, Daniel changed. He married Lauren, a woman with a smile sharp enough to cut glass and a way of making you feel small without saying a word. I tried to love her, for Daniel's sake, but it was hard when she'd roll her eyes at my stories or interrupt me to check her phone. And then there was Sophie, their daughter, my granddaughter, with her brown ponytail and eyes that saw more than a 12-year-old should. She was the one who kept me going, the one who'd curl up next to me and ask me to read Charlotte's Web for the 100th time. It all fell apart the day Tom died. I can still see it. Clear as day, the morning sun streaming through the kitchen curtains, the smell of pancakes on the griddle. Tom chuckling about how I'd bought the wrong creamer again. "Ellie," he said, tapping his spoon against his mug, "if this powdered stuff kills me, you'll never forgive yourself." I laughed, swatting his arm with a dish towel, and then his hand twitched. His eyes widened. like he'd forgotten something important, and he slumped forward, the mug slipping from his fingers. I dropped to my knees, screaming his name, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, guiding me through chest compressions, but I knew from the way his head rested against his shoulder, from the coldness of his fingers when I held them. By the time the paramedics arrived, I was numb, stepping aside as they worked, hearing words like massive and unrecoverable. The house was too loud with their voices and too quiet without Tom's. When they covered him, when they told me there was nothing more they could do, I picked up my phone with trembling hands and called Daniel. It rang 5 times before he answered, his voice distracted, like he was half listening. "Mom." "What's up, Daniel?" I said, my voice breaking. "It's your dad. He collapsed. He's gone." There was a pause, and then he said, "Oh, Mom, today's Lauren's birthday. We've got people over. Can I call you later?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hand lowered the phone, and I hung up before I could hear anything else that would break me further. I sat there, in the kitchen where Tom had taken his last breath, and stared at the coffee mug he'd held, still warm under my fingers. That moment, that phone call, was the crack that split my world open. It wasn't just losing Tom, though that was a wound I'd carry forever. It was realizing that my son, the boy I'd raised with every ounce of love I had chosen a party over his father's death. I didn't know then about the money, the lies, the plans Lauren and Daniel had woven behind my back. I didn't know about Sophie's quiet courage, or the letter Tom had written, or the strength I'd find in myself. But I knew, sitting in that kitchen with the sunlight fading, that I'd lost more than a husband. I'd lost a son, too. The mediation room brought it all back, the pain, the betrayal, but also the clarity. When I walked out of that office, the October air was crisp, the leaves crunching under my shoes. I looked up at the oak trees lining the street, their branches strong despite the coming winter, and I thought of Sophie. She was the reason I'd fought, the reason I'd stood up when I wanted to crumble. She was my light, my hope, the piece of Tom that still lived in this world. I'm going to tell you the whole story, from the day Tom left me to the moment I found my way back to myself. It's a story about love and loss, about family and forgiveness, about the kind of strength you don't know you have until you need it. But it's also a story about you, about the moments in your life when you've had to stand up for what's right, even when it hurts. If this moment in my journey resonates with you, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the story. And down in the comments, share with me. What's a time you had to fight for something that mattered? Even when it was hard, your stories mean the world to me, because we're all in this together, finding our way through the light and the shadows. The kitchen was always the heart of our home. It's a small room, tucked into the back of our red brick house in Westerville, Ohio, with oak cabinets worn smooth from years of use, and a table Tom built himself when we moved in back in '78. That morning, the curtains let in a soft glow of October sunlight, painting the linoleum floor in patches of gold. The air smelled of pancakes and coffee, and Tom was sitting there, his flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows, chuckling about the creamer I'd bought. "Ellie, honey," he said, tapping a spoon against his mug, "this powdered stuff's gonna be the death of me. You'll feel guilty forever." I swatted his arm with a dish towel, laughing, and turned to flip the pancakes on the griddle. Then it happened. His laugh cut off. Sharp, like someone had flipped a switch. His hand twitched, the mug slipping from his fingers, and he slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a dull thud. "Tom," I screamed, the dish towel falling to the floor. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands shaking as I touched his face, his neck, searching for a pulse. His eyes were open, wide and empty, like he'd seen something I couldn't. "Tom, please, wake up." I fumbled for the phone, my fingers clumsy, and dialed 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" The operator's voice was calm, too calm for the chaos in my chest. "My husband, he's collapsed. He's not breathing." I choked out, my voice breaking. "Please, hurry, ma'am. Stay with me. Can you start chest compressions?" she asked, guiding me through the steps. I pressed my hands to Tom's chest, counting out loud, my knees digging into the linoleum. His body felt heavy, wrong, like it wasn't him anymore. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed to mock me. Too bright for a moment this dark. I kept going, tears streaming down my face, until the paramedics burst through the door, their boots loud against the floor. They worked fast, their voices clipped words like defibrillator and no response cutting through the haze in my head. I stood back, my hands pressed to my mouth, watching as they tried to bring him back. But I knew from the way his hand lay limp on the table, from the coldness of his fingers when I'd held them, when they finally stopped. One of them, a young man with kind eyes, touched my arm. "I'm so sorry, Mom. We did everything we could." I nodded, numb, and watched as they covered Tom with a sheet, right there in our kitchen, where we danced to the radio, argued over bills, and laughed until our sides hurt. The house was too loud with their radios crackling, too quiet without Tom's voice. I sank onto a chair, staring at the coffee mug he'd been holding, the creamer still swirling inside. It was still warm when I touched it, like it hadn't caught up to the fact that he was gone. I don't know how long I sat there. The paramedics' voices fading into the background, the sunlight shifting across the floor. At some point they left, and the coroner came, asking if I wanted a moment with Tom before they took him. I shook my head. What was the point? The moment I needed was gone, stolen in a heartbeat. I picked up my phone, my hands trembling like leaves in a storm, and called Daniel. It rang 5 times, each one a knife in my chest, before he answered, "Mom, what's up?" His voice was distracted, like he was half listening, maybe flipping through channels or scrolling on his phone. "Daniel," I said, my throat tight. "It's your dad. He collapsed in the kitchen. He's gone." There was a pause, long enough for me to hear laughter in the background, glasses clinking. Then he said, "Oh, Mom, today's Lauren's birthday. We've got people over. Can I call you later?" His words hit like a slap, sharp and cold. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My hand lowered the phone, and I hung up before I could hear anything else, before I could beg my own son to care. I sat there, alone in the kitchen, the silence heavier than anything I'd ever known. The pancakes were still on the griddle, burned black now, the smell bitter in the air. I looked at Tom's chair, the one he always sat in for breakfast, for late-night talks over crossword puzzles, and I felt like I was drowning. My son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep, the boy Tom had taught to ride a bike in the driveway, had chosen a party over his father's death. It wasn't just Tom I'd lost that morning. It was Daniel, too. I think back to the summer of 1978, when Tom and I first moved into this house. We were young, barely 25, with a baby on the way and dreams bigger than our bank account. The backyard was just a patch of dirt then, but Tom spent weeks building a wooden swing for the oak tree he planned to plant. "This'll be for our kids," he said, his hands covered in soil, his grin brighter than the July sun. "They'll grow up climbing this tree, Ellie, and we'll grow old watching them." We did grow old. Or at least Tom did. Until that morning in the kitchen. Those years were full of moments I hold on to like treasures. Daniel's first steps across the living room. His laughter when Tom tossed him in the air. The way he'd curl up between us on the couch, his tiny hands clutching my fingers. I was a teacher then, shaping little minds at Westerville Elementary. But my real work was here, in this house, building a family with Tom. I gave up my dreams of writing novels to make sure Daniel had everything: new shoes for school, books for his curious mind, a home where he always felt safe. Now, sitting in the kitchen with Tom's absence like a shadow over me, I wondered where that boy had gone. Daniel was 35 now, a man with a wife and a daughter of his own, but somewhere along the way, he'd drifted away. It started when he married Lauren, a woman who walked into our lives like she owned them, her smile sharp and her words sharper. I tried to love her, for Daniel's sake, but it was hard when she'd interrupt my stories to check her phone or make little jabs about my old-fashioned ways. "Ellie, you really should get an iPhone," she'd say, her laugh thin as ice. It's not the 90s anymore. Sophie, though, was different. My granddaughter had her mother's brown eyes, but her grandfather's heart. At 12, she was quiet but angel fire, her ponytail swinging as she read books with me on the couch. She'd sit close, her voice soft as she asked, "Grandma, why do grown-ups lie?" Sometimes I'd smooth her hair and say, "Not all of them do, honey. But some forget what matters." She was my light, the piece of Tom I could still hold on to. When the coroner left, the house felt like a stranger's. I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and lay on our bed, the sheets still smelling of Tom's aftershave. His phone was on the nightstand. The screen dark, I picked it up, hoping for something: a message, a photo, anything to bring him back. There was a missed call log from the night before. 10:42 p.m. To Daniel, no voicemail, no answer. Tom had tried to reach him, maybe sensing something was wrong, and Daniel hadn't picked up. I held the phone to my chest, tears soaking the pillow, and felt the weight of everything we'd built: 42 years of marriage, a house full of memories, a man who'd worked every day to give us a good life. And Daniel's silence was louder than any eulogy could ever be. I don't know how I got through those first hours, those first days. The neighbors brought casseroles, their voices gentle as they said, "Tom was such a good man. Ellie, we're so sorry." I nodded, my hands gripping the edge of the counter, because what could I say? That my son wasn't here, that he'd chosen Lauren's birthday over his father's goodbye. The kitchen became my refuge, even with its ghosts. I'd sit at the table, staring at Tom's chair. The mug I couldn't bring myself to wash. The sunlight moved across the floor, slower now as autumn deepened, and I felt like I was moving through someone else's life. I kept expecting Daniel to call, to show up at the door with an apology, his arms open like when he was a boy, but the phone stayed silent, and the driveway stayed empty. I called again the night before Tom's funeral, hoping he'd changed his mind. But Lauren answered. "Ellie, we're still figuring things out," she said, her voice bright, like she was talking about a cancelled dinner plan. "We booked a weekend getaway, and the cancellation fees are steep. It's not personal, you know, I'm just trying to keep things light for my mental health." I didn't respond. I hung up, my hands shaking, and stared at the phone until the screen went black. I didn't want to beg my son to come to his father's funeral. Not when Tom had stayed up nights with him when he was colicky, built Lego cities on the living room floor, taught him to balance a checkbook by 12. Not when Tom had called him the night before he died and got no answer. The funeral was at First Presbyterian, the church where Daniel was baptized, where Tom and I renewed our vows on our 20th anniversary. The pews were full of faces I hadn't seen in years, Tom's old co-workers, neighbors, friends from the garage where he'd fixed cars for decades. They hugged me, their hands warm, their words kind, but all I could hear was the absence of Daniel's voice. I stood by the casket, gripping the podium, my eyes scanning the room for a face that wasn't there. People noticed, of course they did. Betty from next door leaned in, her perfume strong, and whispered, "Is Daniel okay? Did he miss a flight?" I forced a smile, my throat tight. He's busy, Betty, you know how it is. But I didn't know how it was. I didn't understand how my son could be anywhere but here, saying goodbye to the man who'd given him everything. Frank, Tom's college buddy, clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "I thought your boy would be front and center today." I nodded, the words stuck in my chest, and turned away before he could see the tears. After the service, I stood by the coffee urn in the fellowship hall, the chatter around me a dull hum. Brian, one of Tom's co-workers, approached, his tie loosened. "I don't mean to pry." "Ellie," he said, "but Tom mentioned something odd last month. He was stressed about helping Daniel out financially. Said it was weighing on him." I froze, my hand tightening around my cup. Tom hadn't told me anything like that. We didn't keep secrets, or so I'd thought. I excused myself, slipping into the restroom, and sat on the closed toilet lid, staring at the tiles until someone knocked, asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. My husband was gone, my son was missing, and now there was this, a hint of something hidden, something wrong. I drove home that night, the streets of Westerville quiet under the streetlights, and poured myself a glass of wine. The house was unbearable, every creak a reminder of Tom's absence. I sat in his chair, the worn leather still holding the shape of him, and tried not to think about how alone I felt. This is just the beginning of my story, the raw, aching start of a journey I never wanted to take. I didn't know then what I'd find in Tom's desk, or what Sophie would show me, or how I'd find the strength to stand up in that mediation room. But I knew, even in those dark days, that I couldn't let Tom's love, his legacy, be forgotten. I had to keep going, for him, for Sophie, for the family we'd built. If this piece of my heart speaks to you, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to follow along. I'm sharing this because I believe our stories matter, because they remind us we're not alone. In the comments, tell me, have you ever faced a moment when someone you loved let you down? How did you keep going? Your words mean more than you know, and I can't wait to read them. The days after Tom's funeral blurred into one another, each one heavy with a silence that seemed to settle into the bones of our house. The red brick walls of our home in Westerville, Ohio, felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for Tom's laugh to fill them again. I'd walk into the kitchen every morning, half expecting to see him at the table, his flannel shirt rolled up, his coffee mug steaming. But the chair was empty, the mug unwashed in the sink, a quiet monument to the life we'd lost. I couldn't bring myself to clean it, not yet. It was all I had left of that last morning, when the sunlight was still ours and the world hadn't broken yet. The funeral had been a week ago, but the ache of it lingered, sharp and raw. First Presbyterian Church had been packed with familiar faces, neighbors like Betty, who brought her famous green bean casserole, Frank, Tom's old college buddy, who clapped my shoulder too hard, Brian from the garage, who dropped that bombshell about Tom's stress over Daniel's finances. Their kindness was a comfort, but it couldn't fill the hole Daniel's absence left. My son, my only child, hadn't shown up to say goodbye to his father. He'd chosen Lauren's birthday getaway over standing by me, over honoring the man who'd given him everything. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice on the phone, distracted. "Careless, Mom. Can I call you later?" It was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the oak tree in the backyard sway in the October breeze, its leaves a fiery mix of red and gold. Tom had planted that tree for Daniel, back when we were young and full of dreams. I could still see them out there. Tom hoisting Daniel onto his shoulders, both of them laughing as they hung a tire swing from the lowest branch. "This'll last forever." "Ellie," Tom had said, his hands dirty, his grin wide. Forever. The word felt like a lie now, crumbling under the weight of Daniel's silence. I turned away from the window, my hands restless, and found myself in Tom's study. It was a small room off the living room, with a wooden desk he'd built himself and shelves crammed with car manuals and old paperbacks. The air smelled of dust and ink, and a single lamp cast a warm glow over the clutter. I hadn't been in here since he died, hadn't wanted to face the pieces of him that lingered, but something pulled me to the desk, to the drawers he'd always kept so tidy. Maybe I was looking for answers, or maybe I just needed to feel him close again. I opened the top drawer, my fingers brushing against pens, paper clips, a half-empty pack of gum. Nothing special, just the ordinary things of a man who'd lived fully. The second drawer was heavier, stuffed with files labeled in Tom's neat handwriting. Taxes, insurance, retirement. I pulled them out, one by one, not sure what I was searching for, until I found it a slim blue folder tucked at the back, labeled Daniel Transfers. My heart stuttered. I sat down in Tom's chair, the leather creaking under me, and opened the folder. Pages of bank statements stared back, each one a record of money moving from Tom's account to Daniel's. $2,000 in March, $3,500 in June, $12,000 in August, marked urgent law and medical. The numbers blurred as my eyes filled with tears. Tom hadn't told me about any of this. We'd merged our accounts the day we got married, agreed to share everything, every decision, every dream. Why had he kept this from me? I flipped through the statements, my hands trembling, until a piece of yellow legal paper slipped out, folded in half. Tom's handwriting covered it, the ink bold and familiar. It was addressed to Daniel. I read it slowly, each word a knife. Daniel, this is the second time you've told your mother one thing and done another. I've kept quiet because I wanted to believe you were being honest. But if you lie about Lauren's expenses again, or if I find out you've used this money for anything other than what you said, I'll have no choice but to cut you off. I love you, but I won't let you hurt your mother's trust. Dad, the letter was dated 2 weeks before Tom died. He'd never sent it. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a sob, as the room spun around me. Tom had known. He'd known Daniel was lying, that the money wasn't for medical bills or rent, but for something else, something Lauren had spun into a story to keep the cash flowing, and he'd carried that weight alone, shielding me from the truth. I pictured him sitting here, late at night, writing this letter, his brow furrowed, his heart breaking for the son he still loved. I don't know how long I sat there. The letter crumpled in my hands, the lamp casting shadows across the desk. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and I felt like I was sinking into a sea of questions. Why hadn't Tom told me? Had he thought I couldn't handle it? And Daniel, how could he do this? How could he take money from his father, lie to his face, and then not even show up when Tom needed him most? I think back to the summer of 1982 when Daniel was 5, his hair a mess of curls and his knees always scraped from running in the backyard. He'd help Tom in the garage, passing wrenches with his little hands, beaming when Tom called him my best mechanic. I'd watch them from the kitchen window, stirring cookie dough, my heart so full it hurt. Those were the days when Daniel was my shadow, following me around the house, asking a million questions. Mom, why do birds sing Mom? Can I have a dog? I'd given up my dream of writing to be there for him, to make sure he had a childhood full of love and laughter. Tom worked long hours at the garage, but he was home every night, reading Daniel bedtime stories, his voice deep and warm, now, sitting in Tom's study with that letter in my hands. I wondered where that boy had gone. Daniel was a man now, 35, with a job he hated and a wife who seemed to love him more for what he could give her than who he was. I'd seen the signs, Lauren's expensive handbags, their weekend trips to the lake, the way Daniel's smile never reached his eyes anymore. But I'd told myself it was just a phase, that he'd come back to us. I was wrong. I closed the folder and tucked the letter into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the edge of Tom's old pocket knife. Still in the drawer. It was the one he'd used to carve our initials into the oak tree out back, a silly thing we'd done when we were newlyweds. I held it for a moment, the metal cool against my palm, and felt a surge of anger not at Tom, but at myself. How had I missed this? How had I let our family drift so far apart that night? I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, the sheet still faintly scented with Tom's aftershave, and stared at the ceiling. The house creaked, the way it always did in autumn, and I kept replaying Brian's words from the funeral. Tom was stressed about helping Daniel out financially. I got up, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor, and went to the living room. My phone was on the coffee table, the screen glowing with notifications I hadn't checked. I opened Instagram, something I rarely did, and saw Lauren's latest post. It was a photo of her in a bright pink dress, holding a mimosa, her smile wide as she stood in front of a lake. The caption read, "Best birthday ever. Love, my hubby." It was posted the day of Tom's funeral, right in the middle of the eulogy. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred, my hands shaking. She'd been sipping cocktails, laughing with friends, while I stood alone by Tom's casket, my heart breaking, and Daniel had been there with her. Not here, not with me. I set the phone down, my chest tight, and walked back to the kitchen. The mug was still in the sink, the creamer settled at the bottom like a ghost of that morning. I touched it, my fingers tracing the handle, and whispered, "Tom." What do I do now? The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since Tom died. It wasn't peace, not yet, but a kind of resolve, sharp and cold. I went back to the study, opened the drawer, and pulled out the blue folder again. I read through every statement, every number, every lie. I held Tom's letter, its edges soft from my grip, and felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was angry, not the loud, shouting kind, but the quiet kind that burns slow and steady, like a fire you can't put out. I thought about Sophie, my granddaughter, with her quiet strength and her questions about why grown-ups lie. She was the one good thing left, the one piece of Tom that hadn't slipped away. I didn't know what I'd do with the folder, with the letter, with the truth I'd found, but I knew I couldn't let it stay buried. Tom had tried to protect me, but he was gone. And now it was my turn to protect what mattered, our family, our legacy. Sophie. This is where my story starts to change, where the pain begins to turn into something else. I didn't know then about Sophie's audio diary, or the fight that was coming, or the strength I'd find in myself. But I knew, sitting in that study with Tom's letter in my hands, that I couldn't let his love be forgotten. I had to keep going. For him, for Sophie, for the truth. If this moment in my journey speaks to you, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to follow along. Your support means the world, and I want to hear your stories too. In the comments, tell me, have you ever uncovered a truth that changed everything? How did you face it? I'm here, reading every word, because we're all walking this road together. The October days in Westerville, Ohio, had a way of slipping by, each one cooler than the last, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. My red brick house stood quiet under the greying sky, the oak tree in the backyard shedding its crimson leaves like tears. I'd taken to sitting in the kitchen, Tom's empty chair across from me, the unwashed coffee mug still in the sink. It was a ritual now, a way to hold on to him, even as the world kept turning without him. But the folder I'd found in his study, the one with the bank transfers and his unsent letter to Daniel, sat heavy on my mind, a weight I couldn't shake. I'd read that letter a dozen times. Tom's words etched into my heart, "I won't let you hurt your mother's trust." He'd known Daniel was lying, that the thousands of dollars he'd sent weren't for medical bills or rent, but for something else. Something Lauren had spun into a story. And he'd carried that secret alone, protecting me until the end. The betrayal stung. Not just because of Daniel, but because I'd missed it. I'd spent 42 years building a family with Tom, raising our son, pouring every ounce of love into this house. And yet, I'd been blind to the cracks forming beneath the surface. I was in the living room one afternoon, the curtains drawn against the autumn chill. When the doorbell rang, it was a soft chime, almost hesitant, and I opened the door to find Sophie standing there, her brown ponytail swinging, a backpack slung over one shoulder. At 12, she was all angles and quiet strength, her eyes too wise for her years. "Hi, Grandma," she said, her voice small but steady. "Can I come in?" "Of course, honey," I said, stepping aside. My heart lifted at the sight of her, the one bright spot in the darkness of these past weeks. She kicked off her sneakers by the door, the way she always did, and followed me to the kitchen. I poured her a glass of apple cider, the kind she loved from the farmer's market, and set it on the table. "What brings you here? Everything okay?" She fidgeted with the zipper on her backpack, her fingers quick and nervous. I need to show you something," she said, glancing at the doorway, like she was afraid someone might walk in. She pulled out her phone, a simple model Daniel had gotten her last Christmas, and placed it on the table. "It's not much, but..." I recorded some stuff. Things Mom and Dad said when they thought I was asleep. My stomach twisted. "Sophie, what kind of stuff?" She bit her lip, her eyes searching mine. "They're mad about Grandpa's will." Mom said, "She said they could make you change it if they pushed hard enough. She said you're confused, Grandma, that you're not thinking right since Grandpa died." Her voice cracked, and she looked down, her hands clenching. "I didn't know who else to tell. I believe you." I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Her skin was warm, her fingers trembling, and I felt a surge of love so fierce it nearly broke me. "Oh, Sophie," I said, my voice thick. "You don't have to carry this alone. Thank you for being so brave." She tapped her phone, and a recording started, the sound tinny but clear. Lauren's voice filled the kitchen, sharp and fast. "If we push just a little harder, Dan, she'll crack. We'll say she's grieving, confused. The lawyer can question her state of mind. And boom, the trust gets flagged." Daniel's voice was quieter, hesitant. "I don't know. Lauren, Mom's not stupid. What if she finds out Lauren laughed? A cold, brittle sound. Find out she's too busy crying over Tom to notice anything." The recording stopped, and the kitchen was silent again. The only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I sat there, frozen, the words sinking into me like stones. Lauren wasn't just lying about the money. She was plotting to undermine me, to paint me as a frail old woman who couldn't be trusted. And Daniel, my Daniel, was letting her. I looked at Sophie, her eyes wide with worry, and forced a smile. "You did the right thing, honey," I said. "I'm so proud of you." She nodded, her shoulders relaxing a little. "There's more. Grandma, I've been saving them for a while. I didn't know what to do until now." I squeezed her hand, my mind racing. "Can you send those to me? I'll take care of it." "I promise." She nodded again, her fingers quick on her phone. And a moment later, my phone buzzed with a file. I didn't listen to it then, not with Sophie watching me. But I knew it was a lifeline, a spark of light in the darkness that had swallowed me since Tom died. That night, after Sophie left, I sat in the living room, the glow of a single lamp casting shadows across the walls. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. I played the recordings, one after another, each one a knife in my chest. Lauren's voice was relentless, scheming about the will, about how to handle me. Daniel's was softer, full of excuses, but never once did he stop her. I closed my eyes, picturing Tom at his desk, writing that letter to Daniel, his heart heavy with the truth he couldn't bring himself to share. I thought back to the summer of 1995 when Sophie was just a baby, and Daniel was still our boy, not yet lost to Lauren's world. We'd spent a weekend at Alum Creek Lake, just the four of us, Tom, Daniel, me, and little Sophie in her tiny sun hat. Daniel had carried her on his shoulders, laughing as she grabbed at his hair, while Tom and I watched from a picnic blanket, our hands intertwined. "He's going to be a great dad," Tom had said, his voice full of pride. "Just like you're a great mum." Ellie. I'd believed it then, believed in the family we were building, the love that would hold us together. Now, listening to Daniel's voice on those recordings, I felt like I was mourning him too. The boy who'd carried Sophie on his shoulders was gone, replaced by a man who let his wife spin lies while his mother grieved alone. I set the phone down, my hands shaking, and walked to the kitchen. The oak tree outside the window stood tall against the night sky, its branches swaying like they were whispering Tom's words, "I won't let you hurt your mother's trust." The next morning, I woke with a fire in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something stronger, a resolve to protect what Tom had left behind. I called Bob Mitchell, our family lawyer, a man who'd known Tom since their days at the garage. His office was in downtown Westerville, a small brick building with creaky floors and the faint smell of old books. I brought the folder from Tom's desk, the letter, and a copy of Sophie's recordings, my hands steady as I laid them on his desk. "Ellie," Bob said, adjusting his glasses, "this is serious. You're saying you want to amend the will, put everything into a trust for Sophie." "Everything," I said, my voice firm. "The house, the savings. Tom's stocks, none of it goes to Daniel or Lauren. I want Sophie to have it when she's 25, with access for school and housing before then. And if they try to challenge it, I want a clause that cuts them off completely." Bob leaned back, his pen tapping the desk. "That's airtight. But it's going to stir up trouble. You sure about this?" I thought of Sophie, her quiet courage, her voice on those recordings. I thought of Tom, his letter crumpled in my pocket, his love for our family stronger than any lie. "I've never been surer," I said. We spent hours going over the details, Bob scribbling notes, his voice calm but focused. He reviewed the bank statements, his brow furrowing at the $12,000 marked for Lauren Medical. "This doesn't add up," he said. "You're sure Tom didn't know about these?" "He knew enough to write that letter," I said, sliding it across the desk. Bob read it, his expression softening, and when he looked at me, there was respect in his eyes. "You're doing the right thing. Ellie," he said, "this trust will protect Sophie, and these recordings, they're gold. If Lauren tries anything, she won't have a leg to stand on." I left his office with a weight lifted, not gone, but lighter. The autumn air was sharp, the streets of Westerville lined with pumpkins and scarecrows, signs of a season moving forward. I drove home, the folder on the passenger seat, and felt something new, a spark of hope, kindled by Sophie's bravery and Tom's truth. That evening, Lauren showed up at my door, unannounced, her heels clicking on the porch like she was marching into battle. She wore a tailored coat, her hair perfect, but her eyes were hard, calculating. "Ellie," she said, not waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk about the will. This trust thing, it's a mistake. You're hurting Daniel, and Sophie, too." I let her in, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see how far she'd go. We stood in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow over the couch where Sophie and I read books. I crossed my arms, my voice steady. "A mistake, Lauren. You've been lying about money for months. You think I don't know." Her face tightened, but she forced a smile. "Lying. Those were loans. Ellie, Daniel needed help, and Tom was happy to give it. You're twisting this because you're grieving." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "I found the bank statements. I found Tom's letter. And Sophie, she heard you. Lauren, she heard you planning to call me confused, to take what's not yours. You don't understand what family means, and I'm done pretending you do." Lauren's smile vanished, her voice rising. "You're delusional. You think Sophie's some saint. She's a kid. Ellie, and you're using her to punish us." I didn't flinch. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low, cold. "And don't come back until you're ready to tell the truth." She stood there, her hands clenched, then turned and stormed out, her heels echoing on the hard wood. I closed the door, my heart pounding, and leaned against it, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. I thought of Sophie, her voice on the recordings, her trust in me. I thought of Tom, his letter, a promise he couldn't keep, but I would. I think back to the nights I read to Sophie, her small body curled against mine, her questions about the world so big and pure. "Grandma," she'd asked once, "why do some people lie?" I'd smoothed her hair and said, "Because they're scared of the truth, honey. But the truth always finds a way." Now, holding her recordings, I knew she'd found that way, and I had to follow her lead. This moment, this spark, was when I started to fight back, not with anger, but with love, for Sophie, for Tom, for the family we'd built. I didn't know how it would end, what Lauren would do, or if Daniel would ever come back to me. But I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Sophie's light, Tom's truth, they were with me, guiding me forward. If this part of my story touches you, I'd love for you to hit that like button and subscribe to hear what comes next. Your support keeps me going, and I want to hear your stories too. In the comments, share a time when someone's courage inspired you to stand up. I'm reading every word because we're all finding our way, one brave step at a time. The November wind rattled the windows of my red brick house in Westerville, Ohio, carrying the sharp bite of winter just around the corner. Inside, the kitchen glowed under the soft light of the pendant lamp, the air warm with the smell of cinnamon from the apple pie I'd baked that afternoon. Tom's chair sat empty across from me, the unwashed coffee mug still in the sink, a quiet reminder of the morning he left me. But tonight, I wasn't alone. Sophie was curled up on the living room couch, her nose buried in a book, her brown ponytail spilling over the cushion. At 12, she was my anchor, the spark that had lit the fire inside me to fight for what was right. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of pain and purpose. Sophie's audio diary, those recordings of Lauren and Daniel scheming to undermine me, had been a wake-up call. I'd taken them to Bob Mitchell, our family lawyer, along with the bank statements and Tom's unsent letter, and together we'd built an ironclad trust for Sophie. Every penny Tom's savings, the house, his stocks would go to her when she turned 25, with access for school and housing before then. If Daniel or Lauren tried to challenge it, they'd lose everything, even visitation rights during the trust's active years. It was harsh, I knew, but it was the only way to protect Sophie from their lies. I was washing dishes, my hands moving through the soapy water, when the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Sophie looked up from her book, her eyes narrowing. "Grandma, you expecting anyone?" she asked, her voice low. "No." "Honey," I said, drying my hands on a towel. My heart gave a little thud, a warning I couldn't ignore. I walked to the front door, the hardwood cool under my bare feet, and opened it to find Lauren standing on the porch, her tailored coat buttoned tight against the cold. Daniel was behind her, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his face drawn like he hadn't slept in days. Lauren's heels clicked as she stepped forward, not waiting for an invitation. "Ellie," she said, her voice clipped. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't move, my hand resting on the doorframe. "You don't get to barge in here." "Lauren," I said, my tone calm but firm. "Not after everything." Her eyes flashed, but she forced a smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Everything. You're the one tearing this family apart. Ellie. Cutting Dan out of the will, setting up that trust. It's cruel, and it's not what Tom would have wanted." I glanced at Daniel, hoping for a flicker of the boy I'd raised, but he just stared at the ground, his shoulders hunched. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside, "but don't expect me to back down." They followed me into the living room, where Sophie sat up, her book forgotten. She hugged her knees, her eyes darting between her parents and me, and I gave her a small nod, a silent promise that I had this under control. Lauren perched on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid, while Daniel slouched beside her, his hands still in his pockets. The lamp cast a warm glow over the room, catching the dust motes in the air, but the tension was thick, like a storm brewing. "Let's be reasonable," Lauren said, crossing her arms. "You're hurting Dan, Ellie, and Sophie, too. That trust, it's locking away money we need for her future. You're punishing us because you're still grieving, and it's not fair." I stood by the fireplace, my back straight, my green cardigan soft against my skin. "Fair," I said, my voice low. "You want to talk about fair? Lauren, you lied about medical bills, about rent, to take thousands from Tom. You planned to call me confused, to take control of his legacy, and you—" I turned to Daniel, my heart aching. "You let her. You didn't come to your father's funeral. You chose a weekend getaway over saying goodbye." Daniel flinched, his eyes flicking up to meet mine for the first time. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to be like that," he said, his voice hoarse. "It was Lauren's birthday. And don't." I cut him off, my voice steady but sharp. "Don't blame her. You made a choice. Daniel, you chose her over your father, over me, over Sophie." Lauren's face twisted, her voice rising. "You're delusional, Ellie. You're twisting everything because you're lonely. You think you can use Sophie against us. She's our daughter, not yours." Sophie stood, her book falling to the floor with a soft thud. "Stop it, Mom," she said, her voice trembling but clear. I heard you and Dad talking about Grandma, about the money. You said you'd make her look confused. I recorded it because I didn't want you to lie anymore." The room went still, the kind of silence that feels like the world holding its breath. Lauren's mouth opened, then closed, her eyes wide with shock. Daniel's face crumpled, his hands covering his face. "Sophie," Lauren said, her voice shaking, "you don't understand. You're just a kid. You're misinterpreting things." "No, I'm not," Sophie said, stepping closer to me, her small hand finding mine. "I know what I heard, and I know Grandma's telling the truth. You're the ones lying." I squeezed Sophie's hand, my heart swelling with pride and pain. "You heard her, Lauren," I said, my voice steady. "Sophie's not a pawn in your game. She's the reason I'm doing this. Tom's money, his love, it's for her, not for you to squander on vacations or handbags." Lauren stood, her heels clicking as she paced, her hands clenched. "This is insane. You're brainwashing her, Ellie. You're turning our daughter against us. I didn't have to." I said, my eyes locked on hers. "You did that yourself." Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, I didn't want it to come to this. I'm sorry. I should have been there. I should have stopped her." I looked at him, my son, the boy who'd once run to me with scraped knees and a grin that lit up the world. I wanted to believe him, wanted to pull him into my arms and tell him it was okay. But it wasn't. Not yet. Sorry doesn't fix this. Daniel, I said, my voice soft but firm, you let Lauren lie to your father. You let her plan to take everything from Sophie. You need to prove you're better than that, not just say it. He nodded, his eyes red, but Lauren wasn't done. She turned to Sophie, her voice sharp. Sophie, come with us, now. You don't belong here with her. Sophie shook her head, pressing closer to me. I'm staying with Grandma, she said, her voice steady. She's the one who tells me the truth. Lauren's face flushed, her hands trembling. You'll regret this, Ellie, she said, her voice low. You're tearing this family apart, and it's on you. She stormed out, her coat flapping, her heels echoing on the porch. Daniel hesitated, his eyes pleading, but I shook my head. He followed her, the door closing softly behind him. And I stood there, Sophie's hand in mine, the silence heavy but not empty. I think back to the winter of 2000, when Sophie was just a toddler, her cheeks pink from the cold as we built a snowman in the backyard. Daniel had been there, laughing as he rolled a snowball bigger than Sophie, while Tom watched from the porch, his breath visible in the air. Look at our boy, Ellie, he'd said, his arm around me. He's got your heart. I'd believed it then, believed Daniel would always be the man who loved his family, who'd stand by us no matter what. Now, watching him walk away, I mourned that man, even as I held tight to the girl he'd left behind. I turned to Sophie, her eyes bright with tears but strong. You okay, honey? I asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She nodded, her voice small. I just want things to be okay. Grandma, I don't want to lose Dad, but I can't let Mum lie anymore. I pulled her into a hug, her head resting against my shoulder. You're not losing anyone, I said. You're choosing truth, and that's the bravest thing you can do. I'm here, Sophie, always. We sat on the couch, the lamp casting a warm circle around us, and I told her stories about Tom, how he'd carved our initials into the oak tree, how he'd danced with me under the stars. She listened, her tears drying, and I felt a peace I hadn't known since Tom died. Sophie was my light, my reason to keep going, and I'd do whatever it took to protect her. The next day, I called Bob Mitchell and finalized the trust. He added Sophie's recordings to the file, along with a transcript of the conversation I'd recorded during Lauren's visit. This is bulletproof. Ellie, he said, his voice warm. No court's going to touch this trust. You've done right by Sophie. I thanked him, my heart lighter, and drove to the grocery store. The streets of Westerville, lined with bare trees and early Christmas lights. I bought ingredients for Sophie's favorite cookies, determined to fill the house with warmth again. When I got home, I found a letter in the mailbox, Daniel's handwriting shaky on the envelope. I opened it in the kitchen, my hand steady, and read his words. Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I'm sorry for everything. I want to be better. For Sophie. For you. I just don't know where to start. I set the letter down, my eyes stinging. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. I added a clause to the trust. A small sum for Daniel if he completed a financial management course, and wrote a letter to Sophie, proving he could change. It was my way of leaving the door open, not for me, but for her. I wanted her to have a father, if he could be the man Tom believed he could be. Lauren didn't come back after that night. I heard through Betty, the neighbor with a nose for gossip, that she'd left Westerville, moving to Columbus with Daniel trailing behind. The community noticed, of course, at the farmer's market. People whispered about Lauren's absence, about Daniel's no-show at the funeral. You're better off. Ellie, Betty said, patting my arm. You've got Sophie, and that's what counts. I didn't argue. Sophie started spending more weekends with me, her laughter filling the house again. We baked cookies, read books, and planted bulbs in the backyard, promising each other we'd watch them bloom in spring. One night, as we sat by the fireplace, she looked at me and said, "Grandma, thank you for fighting for me. I feel safe with you." I hugged her tight, my heart full. "You're my light." "Sophie," I said, "you and your grandpa, you're why I keep going." This moment, this fight, was about more than money or a will. It was about love, about truth, about holding on to the family Tom and I had built. I didn't know if Daniel would find his way back, or if Lauren would ever face the mirror of her own choices. But I knew Sophie was safe, and that was enough. If this part of my story resonates with you, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to hear how it all ends. Your support means everything, and I want to hear your stories too. In the comments, share a time when you had to set a boundary to protect someone you love. I'm reading every word because we're all finding our strength, one truth at a time.